Hi and welcome to CG Dive. This is part 2 of the basic character workflow between Blender and Unreal Engine 4. Last time we rigged and prepared the character, now we'll create some animations for him. By the way, if you want to watch CG Dive videos before they are released on YouTube, you can become a supporter on Patreon, Gumroad or YouTube memberships. For example, as I release this video, the remaining 3 videos of this series are already available to supporters. And now we want to create a few animations for this guy that we are going to integrate into Unreal Engine 4 later. Animation is a difficult and complex subject. Here I'll just do the bare minimum so that we have some animations to work with in the game engine. The animations that I'll make are idle, walk, run, crouching, jumping, and one special animation just to check the squash and stretch capabilities of this rig. I'll start by cleaning up my interface. I'm going to select all widgets and clear the transforms, and then organize my interface a little bit so that it is suitable for animation. I want a nonlinear animation window and an action editor. And first I'm going to create my walk. For the walk and run animations, I'm going to be using Rigify Animbox. This is an add-on that I already recommended in previous videos. It's a free add-on, but you can also support the creator if you're so inclined. Once you have the add-on, just install it as any other add-on. Obviously, this add-on only works with Rigify, so if you're following along with me, you can use it. But if you're using a custom rig, you may have to create your own walk and run cycles. But a basic walk cycle is about creating a few key poses, and Animbox does most of the work for us. So when you have the add-on installed, you just go to your N panel and navigate to the RA tab, expand Rigify Walk Run, and here I'm going to want to create a 24 frame walk, so I'm just going to press this 24 button, and in an instant I have a basic walk cycle. Of course, this is just a base for a walk cycle, you should improve upon it, but since nice animation is not the focus of this video, I won't do much, but I kind of want to tweak the spread of these arms. They are extended too far sideways. So first I'm going to clean up my rig a little bit. I'm going to hide all of the tweak layers. By the way, Animbox switched my arms to FK, so I'm going to hide the IK controls for the arms. And the legs are in IK, so I'm going to hide the FK controls. Now if I select the upper arm here and look at my transforms, this Z value seems to control how far the arm extends sideways. So I could create new keyframes for the arm, but actually this is much easier to fix in the graph editor. So I'm going to switch here to the graph editor, and I want to work on the Z rotation axis. Rotation is in quaternions, so in the search field, if I type Z and then Q for quaternion, that will isolate the Z quaternion rotation. And now if I select all keyframes and press G and then Y, I'll be able to move all of these keyframes simultaneously on the Y-axis. And actually I want to fix both arms, so I'm going to select the other arm as well by shift-clicking. And now in the N panel here, I want to make sure that the cursor is set to Y0. Then I'm going to switch to the cursor. And now instead of moving these keyframes, I'm going to scale them. I'm going to press S and then Y. And that will scale both of these curves simultaneously and fix both arms. So I want something like this. And now I have arms that look a little bit more natural. And you can keep tweaking the curves, you can add new keyframes, whatever you need to do to make the animation more appealing. But I'm going to call this done, and that will do nicely for our purposes. I'm going to switch back to the dope sheet and action editor. Before we move on to creating the other actions, I would highly suggest that you go to frame 1, select all of the widgets, and press I and add a location, rotation, and scale keyframe. Actually, I'm going to undo to demonstrate why I suggest you do this. I'm going to unlink this animation for a second and create a new one. And here I'm going to move the pelvis and add a rotation keyframe for it. And now if I switch to my walking animation, you'll see that this pelvis rotation was kept. And that is because I didn't have a keyframe for it in the walking animation. All I have to do is select all of my widgets and go to Pose, Clear Transform All, and then play the animation again, and it will be all fine again. So if I want to avoid having to reset all of the widgets every time I switch animations, I can just go to frame 1, and then with all widgets selected, I'm going to insert a location, rotation, and scale keyframe, and that will give me a solid default position for this action. So I think I'm going to call this the safety keyframe. Now I did hide a lot of the widgets, and if you plan to animate these widgets in other actions, then you should unhide them and keyframe them as well. In my case, these are all of the widgets that I'll be using, so keyframing these widgets will be enough for me. Something else that you may want to keyframe are the IK, FK switches and the limb follow options. That is, if you plan to have some actions in IK mode and others in FK mode. But in my case, I'm going to keep the arms to FK the whole time and legs to IK the whole time, so I don't need to keyframe anything here. While I'm here, I'm actually going to switch the FK limb follow options to 1 for both arms. I found that that gave me better results when creating the other animations. And for the walk, that will also work nicely. And now I'm just going to rename my animation to control walk, because this is the action on the control rig. And I'm going to push it down to the NLA. Okay, so now I want to create my run animation. Before I do, I'm going to uncheck the NLA track for the walk action, just so that it doesn't interfere with anything. And then select all widgets and, just for good measure, clear my transforms. Next, I'll go to the RA tab again and create an 18 frame run cycle. Let's rename our new action control run. And right away, I'm going to add my safety keyframe. So select all widgets, go to frame 1, press I, and create a location, rotation, and scale keyframe. I'm going to want to fix the spread of the arms again in the exact same way. So I'm going to select the arms, the upper arms, and go to Graph Editor, and again scale these keyframes with the 2D cursor set to Y0, and scale on the Y direction, and bring both arms closer to the body. Something like this. Now this still looks quite stiff, so let's see what we can do. For one thing, having the torso leaning forward a little bit may help. So I'm going to select the torso, and it is the x-axis that controls this kind of leaning forward. So here I'm going to search for XQ, and that will isolate the X quaternion rotation. Just select all keyframes and move them up on the y-axis, and that will make the character lean a little bit forward. Next, I may want to do the exact same thing for the chest widget as well, so just select it. I already have isolated the X quaternion, so I'm just going to select all keyframes and move them up a little bit to see what happens. And here you can play with it, maybe bending it in the opposite direction may look better, whatever you find looks good. Now the arms are close to the body, which is nice, but I think the swing of the arms is not quite there yet. And again, we need the x-axis to work on the swing, which I have already isolated here. So with both arms selected, I'm just going to select the higher keyframes. These are the keyframes that control how far each of the arms swings forward. So if I wanted to swing further forward, I can move these keyframes up. And I'm fixing both arms simultaneously, by the way. So let's see what we have. So we can just go to one of the extreme keys, like on frame 10, and move all of the upper keyframes, and then all of the lower ones, until you find an extreme that you like. Something like that. And now for the run, having the arms completely straight like that looks a little bit too stiff. So I'm going to go to frame 1. And here, for the arm that is swinging forward, I want to rotate the lower arm a little bit and create a rotation keyframe. Let's go to the dope sheet. On frame 10, I'm going to clear the rotation with Alt-R and insert another rotation keyframe, and then simply select the first keyframe and copy it over to frame 19. Okay, now on frame 1, I'm going to copy this pose for the lower arm, then go to the other lower arm, and here on frame 1, I already have a keyframe that is going to work nicely. Then I'm going to go to frame 10 and use the paste pose flipped feature, and that will paste the pose that I copied from the opposite arm. Now I just have to keyframe it, and then copy the first keyframe to frame 18, or 19 I should say. And now I have both lower arms swinging forward. And that is all I'm going to do for the run animation. I noticed that I inserted some keyframes on frame 0 instead of frame 1. So I'm simply going to move them over to frame 1 and then push down my action and uncheck it. Next, I'm going to create my idle animation. I'm going to create a new action, call it control idle. Select all widgets, clear the transform. And now I'm simply going to start positioning my character until I find a nice relaxed pose. Something like this. And I'm going to keep this action extremely simple. I'm just going to make this character swing a little bit side to side, and maybe the chest rocking back and forth a little bit. So for this action, 60 frames or so will be nice. I'm going to select all of my widgets and enter the safety keyframe here. And then on frame 30, I'm going to try to move the torso to the side a little bit, so that the character switches the support leg a little bit, and record a location keyframe, and then simply copy the first frame over to frame 60 or so. And let's see what we have. Yeah, something like this. Maybe the movement can be even more subtle, so I'm going to move. So I'm going to try to make this keyframe a little bit more subtle. Yeah, that will do it for our simple example. I'm going to create another keyframe of the chest rotating just slightly, and copy the first frame over to frame 60. I changed the rotation a little bit. Okay, something subtle like this will work well for our purposes. I'm just going to push down this idle action and uncheck it in the NLA. Clear my transforms, and I can move to the next actions. Next, I want to create an animation of the character walking in a crouched position, which is very common in games. Again, I'm going to favor quickness and sacrifice some quality, so I'm just going to reuse the walk animation and change it a little bit to look like a crouched walk. So I'm going to apply the walk animation and click this button to make a copy of it. And that created a copy, and at the same time it stashed the walk animation, and I already have the walk animation on the NLA, so I don't want that. So I'm going to select this track and delete it. And then I'm going to rename this action to crouch walk. And now the main thing that will turn this walk into a crouch walk is pushing the torso downwards. So again, I'm going to tweak the curves, switch to graph editor, select the torso, and look for Z location. Okay, and that will isolate the Z location, which is the up and down movement of the torso. Select all keyframes on this curve and move it down by pressing G and then Y. And move it down until the character's knee is close to the ground. Now if you play the animation, it kind of looks like a crouched walk. We're going to tweak it a little bit more, but let's go back to the dope sheet and define the timing of this animation. Since this is a crouched walk, it should be a little bit slower than the normal walk. So I'll simply select all widgets here and go to frame 1 and then make sure that I have selected all keyframes and then press S. And that will make the whole animation longer. I'm going to set the last keyframe to frame 31. And for the length of the animation, I'm going to want 30 frames. Now we have something like this. Because I'm reusing the walk animation, I already have a safety keyframe on frame 1, but just in case I'm going to add it again. With all widgets selected, press I and choose location, rotation, and scale. And now I can keep tweaking my animation. I think it will look better if the character is leaning forward a little bit. So I'm going to go to the graph editor with the torso selected. And I want to tweak the X rotation axis. So search for XQ and move all of these keyframes up a little bit so that the character leans forward. And I'm going to do the same thing for the chest. For the crouch walk, I may actually want the arms to move away from the body a little bit. So I'm going to select both of them, isolate the Z quaternion rotation, and as before, use scaling to manipulate both curves at the same time. Next, I want to tweak the swing of the arms, which is on the X-axis. So I'm going to move the extreme keyframes up and down a little bit to find a good balance. And here, having the arms completely straight looks very stiff, so I'm simply going to move the keyframe that I have for the X-axis here up a little bit. And that will give me something that looks a little bit more natural. And if you want to, you feel free to keep tweaking this. For example, you may want to rotate the chest a little bit forward like this. But I'm going to call this done. So I'll go to the dope sheet and push down this new action to the NLA and make sure to uncheck it. Okay, next I want a crouched idle animation. And I can actually use this pose that I have right now as a basis. So I'm going to create a new action, call it control crouch idle. And I'm going to select the food widgets and clear their transforms. And then tweak the pose until I find a nice relaxed pose in the crouch position. Okay, once I get to a pose that I like, I'm going to go to frame 1, select all widgets, and create a safety keyframe. From here, I'm going to set the end of the timeline to 60 or so, and create a very, very simple animation of the body rocking back and forth or sideways or something like that. Okay, now I have a very subtle animation, and that will do nicely as a idle animation. So I'm going to push it down to the NLA and uncheck the track. I'm also going to want a jump action. Rigify Animbox has a jumps feature, but I haven't really explored it and tested it, so I'm not going to use it now. So in this case, we are not going to be able to cheat, and I am going to animate this jump from scratch, but I'm going to keep it very simple. So I'm going to start from the idle animation. So apply the idle action, and I'm simply going to press this button that says 2, and that will create a copy of this action without adding any stashed actions in the NLA. And I'm going to call this one control jump. With all widgets selected, I'm going to select all available keyframes and delete them. And then on frame 1, I'm going to add the safety keyframe, location, rotation, and scale. And let's start blocking this very simple jump. Before the character can actually jump, he needs to push himself from the floor. So we need to push the weight down a little bit. In animation terms, that would be called anticipation. And so on frame 5, let's grab the torso and lower it a little bit. And actually, I'm going to turn on auto keyframe here, and that will make my work a little bit easier. Maybe a little bit lower. And I'm going to also open the arms a little bit. Okay, something like this. And now on frame 15, I want the character to jump and to almost reach the highest point of the jump. So I want to take the torso and the feet and push them up. But before that, let's select the feet controls and copy the first frame that we have to frame 5 so that they stay stationary until frame 5. And then with the feet and torso selected, I'm going to move all of them up. And the feet, I'm actually going to move even further up and rotate them down a little bit. The torso, I can rotate down a little bit, and also the chest. And for the chest, I'm also going to copy the first frame to frame 5. And so let's see what we have now. I want to fix the position of these legs a little bit. And the arms will probably go higher. And now I want the character to stay in the air for a little while. So on frame 25, I'm actually going to select all of the keyframes and just duplicate the keyframes that I have on frame 15. And if I leave it like that, the character will just stay completely stationary, which is kind of weird and unnatural. So instead, I'm going to push this pose a little bit further. The body will go a little bit up. The feet will be pushed even more to an extreme. Maybe separate them a little bit like this. And the hands can go even further up. And that will be the peak of the jump. After that, gravity will take over and the character will have to land again on his feet. So to create the landing really easily, I'm going to select all widgets again, select the keyframes on frame 5 and duplicate them all the way to frame 30. And then I'm going to select the first keyframes and Shift D and duplicate them over to frame 35. And that will actually give me the final animation. We have the character jumping, staying mid-air for a split second, and then landing again. And you can play with the timing and the poses if you want to improve upon this basic animation. Another thing that you can do is to offset some of the keyframes so that the feet arrive at the peak before the body, 1 or 2 frames before it. Same with the arms. And that can give your animation more fluidity, but I'm going to stop here. And I'm not sure when I changed the name of this action, but anyway, I want it to be called control jump. And I'm going to call it done, push it to the NLA, and disable the track it is on. And we are almost done here. I just want to create one more animation to test the squash and stretch features of this rig. So I'm going to clear all transforms, and let's turn off the auto keyframe. I don't need it anymore. And I'm going to select and delete this keyframe that was created automatically. Go to frame 1 and create my safety keyframe. The default pose will be fine for what I need. So next I'm going to go to frame 20 or so. And usually squash and stretch is created with the IK controls for the limbs. But in this case, I want to keep my arms to FK, so I can achieve something similar by simply scaling the FK arm. And I'm going to insert a scale keyframe. And now, as you probably know, if you understand the squash and stretch problem, the problem is not so much the scaling of the bone itself, but the problem appears when the child of a scaled bone is rotated or scaled itself. So let's take the lower arm and rotate it on the x-axis, and then also the hand, and rotate it a little bit, and let's insert rotation keyframes for them. So we have something like this. And then select everything and copy the first keyframe over to frame 40. And now we'll have a cyclic animation of the arm stretching and then going back to normal. And I'm going to call this action control stretch and push it down and disable it. Okay, those are all of the animations that I'm going to need. Next, I'm going to bake them to the game rig, which will be essential if we want to export these animations to a game engine. Because for now, these actions are only on the control rig and they cannot be exported. I want to take a second to say special thanks to Machine.io. They are one of the level 5 supporters of my Bridging the Gap course. So you're watching this video thanks in part to Machine.io. Machine is the brand behind the Mesh Machine and the Decol Machine add-ons for Blender. These add-ons are a must-have for hard surface modeling and detailing in Blender. They are one of the most popular products on the Blender market with thousands of sales and 5-star ratings. Currently, I'm not affiliated with Machine.io, but I may become so in the future. But either way, I own both products and I highly recommend them. Also, big thanks to everyone else who is supporting me. If you want to join the CG Dive supporters, you can pretty much pay whatever you want and you can get some bonuses. But only do so if you can afford it. Just watching and liking these videos is already a huge contribution. Cheers and talk to you in the next video.